I came to the nunatak for the kind of work that likes silence. The rock broke through the ice like a shoulder through a blanket, wind-sanded and brown where the sun did its work, rime-paled where the light only stared. Our field window was a narrow permission granted by weather and fuel and the patience of the logistics desk back at the shelf. I built the day the way a geophysicist is taught to build it. Unpack method, pin routine, let the instruments make their small claims. The tent sat in the lee of a boulder that kept its own counsel. I brewed water that smelled faintly of metal, wrote a line in the notebook about sky clarity, and set the routine on rails. I walked the perimeter first to give my eyes a scale. The ice around the outcrop had a leathered surface, sastrugi pressed by a wind that knew only one story and told it over and over. Here and there, snow caught on ledges like forgotten paper. I tagged a safe path with a strip of cloth on a rock fang and told my legs they would use it whether they felt like it or not. The wind had the thin edge that comes before a front. It hummed at the tent fabric until the fabric decided to act unbothered. I took the gravimeter from its case like a baker lifting a loaf that might collapse. The instrument is not a thing for drama. It wants level, warmth, a steady hand, and respect for all the ways a field day can go wrong when a person rushes. I let it rest against my chest under my parka so the cold would forget its ambition. When I set it down on the first station, I checked bubble and footings and tried not to think about the long string of letters and numbers that would become a report. I logged the station with plain language: bedrock shoulder, firm, no drift, wind constant. A gull line far off made a wavering seam between white and white. The first anomaly arrived like a cough behind me, not loud, not showy. The gravimeter rose a shade above where that station had any right to sit, a quiet spike that would never excite a grantmaker but would make a field worker step closer. I didn't write anomaly, I wrote curiosity. I moved the instrument half a boot length to satisfy the old superstition and watched the reed settle again, still nudged. Cold crept through my glove while I waited for the stubborn little heart inside the thing to stop thinking it was falling. I reminded myself to mark the exact stance with a scratch in the crust, then did so, and felt better in the way you feel better when the map and the ground shake hands. Routine said I should ignore it until a second pass. Method said a second station might tell a story with fewer lies. I walked the safe path to a flank of the nunatak where the rock made a small terrace. The wind smelled briefly of wet stone as if something warm had breathed into the cold. A wrong smell for this weather, a small wrongness that belongs in a notebook. I wrote it there, not as drama, only as a fact that might ask for a cousin later. The gravimeter read steady this time, no quiet spike. The comfort of sameness returned, which is not the same as the comfort of certainty. Back at camp, I sat with the magnetometer and its tangle of leads, laying them out on the sleeping pad like a patient's veins. The sensor likes distance from metal and a mind empty of bias. I walked a gentle traverse across the lee side, letting the sensor nose the air near the bedrock. The baseline stayed neat until a faint hiccup near the place where snow collected in a shallow alcove. The hiccup held no real height, only a shape, a soft rise followed by a clean notch, as if the field had flinched at the memory of a tap. I made a circle on the map with a pencil dull enough to be respectful and told the circle I would come back with the drill. Radio check to the logistics node was a simple courtesy. The iridium phone came alive in my gloved palm with that dry hiss that makes even a professional feel like a child with a secret. The voice at the far end was the voice of a person whose day is built from checklists. I answered in the same tone. Weather stable, winds modest, visibility fair, instruments nominal, commencing core extraction at the marked site. The line carried a small delay that did not belong to satellites alone. When we cleared the script, a fragment came in as if someone else had reached for my channel and thought better of it. Not words, a pulse, then absence. The clerk said nothing about it. I wrote the fragment down and underlined it once. Once is not drama, once is only care. The core drill behaved like a beast that has been taught manners. I staged it on a flat patch of rock less than a stone's throw from the magnetometer hiccup, set the anchors, checked the coolant, and tested the bit against air. The motor sang at a steady pitch that pleased the part of my brain that loves machines as proof against chaos. I braced my stance, brought the bit to the rock, and let the feed take weight by inches that I did not count. Chippings came out like pale commas. The smell was coal dust and a whisper of something electrical, not hot exactly, but awake. I moved my hands through the motions I had done in warmer places. Ease feed, clear flutes, check coolant, measure recoveries by palm and eye, dropped them into the labeled bags that waited with the patience of the dead. Part of the way through the first section, the drill answered itself. The sound bounced back from below with a latency that did not match the depth I had earned. The return was slow, a little late, as if the rock below were larger than the outcrop, as if a cavity listened and then spoke. I have drilled voids. I have drilled ice lenses where rock should be. Those sounds are tinny or eager. This one was patient. I stopped the feed and leaned a gloved knuckle against the housing. The vibration was not smooth. It rose in a pulse slow enough to count, which I did not do. It came like a heart that had learned a winter pace. I let the bit spin free in air for a few breaths, then re-engaged with the slightest pressure. The pulse held. I shut down, because method says to shut down when your instrument tells you it is becoming more than a tool. I listened with the ear of a person who knows that hearing is a weak instrument in wind. The nunatak and the ice around it made their ordinary noises. A lens of clearer air washed the world a shade brighter and moved on. Snow scuffed at my boots with a paper sound. From somewhere under the rock a second pulse came, no stronger than the first, perhaps the sonic echo of my own blood made large by helmet and focus. I do not pretend to know the difference when the difference is small. I wrote it down anyway, pulse again, interval unmeasured, low. Beneath the line I wrote a question mark and then erased it. Questions deserve better than that. I took the gravimeter back to the first station as if walking a path to a house where you once lived. The spike repeated, modest and certain. I shifted half a foot and the spike softened. I returned and it rose. I set the instrument to warm under my coat while I stood there and watched the sky. The light had the flatness of paper now. The wind shifted one voice down the scale. Far out on the ice, a drift line that had been straight made a quiet turn and kept going as if the entire sheet had rotated a few degrees while no one watched. Maps do not like that kind of behavior. I traced my earlier steps back to camp and found the line longer than it had been when I walked it an hour earlier, though my watch, with its unhelpful honesty, could be wrong and cold. The iridium chirped once with no call, a throat clear from the world. I checked the log for the fragment and found that my handwriting had leaned left where it usually leans right. That is the kind of detail a person notices when they are trying not to notice the larger thing. I told myself that fatigue makes letters fall the wrong way. I told myself that wind makes sound where there is nothing to hum. I told myself that bedrock holds stories from when it was soft and sometimes lets those stories out in pressure we can taste but not name. I set the drill again, not over the hiccup, but just off it, so that my hole in the field's notched rise could argue in a way I might parse later. Feed gentle, coolant true, hands steady. The bit met the rock with the calm of a method repeated, chips curled like shavings from a carpenter's plane. The return sound came late again. My palms, inside their gloves, felt the smallest tug at irregular times, a soft insistence that the tool wanted to lean toward a direction with no visible reason. I locked the carriage and killed the motor with a care that felt like respect and a small admission. The day went to its quiet endgame. I bagged the sections I had and marked them with words only. No counts, no depths, only above, middle, below, each with a letter that meant something only to me. The magnetometer traverse. I walked in the last light, showed the same hiccup, the same notch after the soft swell, as if a hand had tapped under the snow and then stopped to listen. I packed the instruments into the tent vestibule where warmth and distance from metal would keep them honest. I wrote the day into the log with the language that makes superiors comfortable and added a second page in a private hand that leaves out nothing a human needs in order to doubt himself properly. When the light thinned to a blue that makes the ice look like a sheet of paper with the words washed off, I stepped out to stand with the rock. The wind had gone down a notch and now spoke in a lower register that belongs to fronts cresting in the dark. I set my glove flat on the bedrock shoulder where the gravimeter liked to rise. Cold grabbed first, then relented. Under the stone, through the stone, something touched the glove back with the slowest rhythm I would ever admit to feeling. It matched nothing I could name. It did not ask me to move. It did not ask me to run. It only kept time with a patience that suggested it would keep time whether I stayed or not. I built the morning from the pieces I trusted and let last night sit where it sat. The gravimeter had offered a quiet rise on the shoulder station. The magnetometer had hiccuped with that notch after a soft swell near the snowed alcove. The iridium had carried a small pulse that didn't belong to any spoken word. And when I set a glove to the rock at dusk, I felt a rhythm that did not belong to my pulse alone. None of that had a name yet. I gave the stove a patient flame and wrote a line that said only that the day would answer in methods or it would not. The air was clean and sharp, the kind of cold that makes wool hum against a wrist. I warmed the gravimeter the way you keep a bird alive in winter, body heat and patience, then gave it the first station again with full courtesy. Bubble perfect, tripod feet biting, parka open just enough that the instrument would think the world was kinder than it was. The rise returned like a student repeating the right answer in a quiet room. I moved a boot width to test the superstition and saw the lift soften. I returned and it steadied. I did not write victory or puzzle. I wrote repeat, then drew a small arrow toward the nunatak's crest. If the rock wanted to speak in a pattern, I owed it a grid that would let it speak without me deciding the words. I flagged a set of stations by feel from the shoulder out toward the snowed alcove, then farther into the lee where the wind scours made low waves. I kept each stand simple, no heroics. Level, settle, note, move, breathe, note. The rises were not dramatic, they were polite. They stitched a shallow ribbon that ran from the shoulder toward the alcove and then leaned away, as if the field preferred a path that did not ask the eye to approve. I marked the ribbon on the map with a soft pencil so the line would keep the humility of an early guess. The magnetometer traverse came next, sensor out, leads tucked so they would not mutter to one another. I walked slow, giving the field a chance to show its mind without my boots rushing it. The baseline steadied, then again that ghost of a swell, then the notch that felt like a flinch. I flattened my palm and listened with bone more than ear. The wind's note had shifted darker, a sign of a front laying a shoulder to the sky beyond the distant cap. In the swale where snow held on in a shadow spill, the instrument asked softly for distance from camp metal, though every piece was where it should be. I stepped back, then sideways. The notch followed the earlier ribbon and sharpened when my boot soles crossed rock veined with a lighter mineral. I told myself to remember that change of color, the way a pale seam can carry a different story even when it looks like decoration. Control is the only honest friend in fieldwork. I took both instruments out onto the blue ice beyond the nunatak's influence and set points where the world should be dull. The gravimeter behaved like a creature relieved to be off stage. The magnetometer too. I stood there in the wide glare with the instruments performing exactly as their makers would want, and it felt like standing on a dock where the tide has forgotten what the moon is. Calm, flat, correct, with a small echo of wrongness hiding under the rightness simply because you know enough to bring it with you. Back at camp, I set the core drill for a second approach. I wanted a hole that would cross the ribbon, not to claim a treasure, but to test whether sound and stone would confirm each other, even when I asked them not to. Anchors firm, coolant quiet, bit inspected with the eye that caught dullness before it becomes penance. I brought the feed down as gentle as judgment and let the motor's song be my metronome. Chippings came up dry and pale. Then, a return with a softness that did not match my progress, an answering beat slow enough to admit, steady enough to distrust. I eased the feed until the bit merely touched, then lifted clear. The pulse remained, as if the stone had learned a rhythm from my first cut and now offered it back regardless of what I did. I set a palm to the drill frame. The vibration climbed my glove, not jagged, not eager. The pulse felt like a long-held breath let out in measured pieces. I shut down and waited for the wrongness to fade with the motor's spin. It did not. The rock kept its timing until the cold convinced it otherwise. I felt that retreat the way you feel a sleeping animal decide it will no longer tolerate your hand on its back. The iridium brought duty back into the tent. I gave a check-in that would read like competence to anyone who read the transcript later. Progress on core, instrumentation consistent, no safety concerns, weather stable with a suggestion of change. The line carried that same slight stagger. A hiss, then the clerk, then a smear, as if a second channel had brushed ours on its way to somewhere else. After the call ended, the device showed a fresh line in the call history that did not belong to me. No number, only a symbol string I did not recognize, like a tag from a test menu. The timestamp was wedged between two lines of my log in a way that argued with order. I emptied the battery and reseated it, then powered back on. The phantom line persisted. I wrote it down because that is what you do when the world undercuts your confidence without raising its voice. I walked the perimeter again because walking settles the part of the mind that wants to force a conclusion. The light had flattened, the color pulled out of the sky as if a sheet of paper had been held to it until the ink bled away. On the wind, I caught a faint smell like a struck stone, a dry spark scent that belongs inside generators and not in open air. It lived a breath and was gone. The sastrugi had that trick of making your steps longer or shorter than you plan. When I traced the tagged route that had felt neat the day before, I reached camp sooner than my gait would suggest. I placed the marker cloth exactly where it had been and found it sat a few paces from the rock I remembered tying it to. The knot was my knot. The cloth was my cloth. The rock had learned a new place in a world where rock is not supposed to do that. By afternoon, I had a ribbon drawn thinly across the map, and a sense that the nunatak did not simply sit in the ice, but sat through it, as if a deeper mass were shouldering up from below, and the outcrop we see is only its first word. I emptied sample bags onto a cloth inside the tent and looked for friends among the fragments. Grains that cling to a magnet, tiny glints of a mineral that forms when pressure and patience share a bed, a smear of darker dust that stains skin with a hint of iron. The magnet took a few flecks from the pale sweep with an eagerness it had not shown on other jobs. The darker smear smelled faintly metallic even against the stove's tired sweetness. I noted each, then tucked them away before my mind could decide that an odor was an omen. I wanted a line of proof that belonged to another sense. I set the drill frame with no bit and used it as a stethoscope, cheek to metal, glove on the bedrock shoulder. The wind had dropped into a steady moan that loved to hide patterns. Beneath it, I heard the slow beat return, not constant enough to be complacent, not erratic enough to blame on nerves. I counted without counting, letting my breath act as measure, even though breath cheats. There were moments when the beat seemed to lean toward my breaths, then slip away as if offended by my presumption. I stayed until the cold told me to stop acting like a novice, then went back to the notebook and tried to find words that were not gossip. Moral pressure waits at the edge of every field window. The clerk at the shelf will ask for yields and safety. The team lead will ask for a decision about whether to move the camp or call it, whether to drill deeper or write this site up as a curiosity for a winter seminar far from any rock that can answer. I'm meant to be careful with fuel, guarded with time, and greedy with data only when greed produces something that survives questions. The nunatak asked for more patience than the schedule allowed. I told the schedule it could share a seat with doubt. In last light, I paced from the shoulder station to the alcove and back again, boots scraping the crust with that papery rasp that makes every step sound like a page. The pulse arrived once more, then hid. I set a glove to the stone and waited for a sign I could live with. Silence is a sign. It is not always mercy. A small tick answered in the bone of my hand, then nothing. Then a pair close together, as if the thing below had noticed me noticing and decided to tease the method that pretends the observer is a ghost. I had the drill carriage half swung toward a new angle when the iridium chirped in the tone that belongs to a call being placed. The screen showed my own device as the origin and a blank as the destination, as if I were calling the stone. The status line announced a connection that did not exist. Then the speaker carried a single thud, spaced just wider than a resting breath. Then another. The device vibrated so faintly that I could have blamed wind until the beat and the glove against the rock matched in a way that made the tent fabric seem to step back. I didn't say a word. I didn't answer, because there was no place to answer to. I set the phone down on the bedrock shoulder where the gravimeter liked to rise and watched the screen hold the lie of a call. The thuds continued in that patient winter tempo. The drill carriage, unlatched, crept a hair toward the marked ribbon, as if the metal knew where work belonged and was tired of waiting for me to admit it. Morning broke without color, a flat wash that made the nunatak look stamped onto a page. I let the stove run on a careful breath and drank heat more than taste. The drill carriage sat exactly where I had left it, only it didn't feel like a thing I had left. It felt like a thing that had taken a position. The iridium lay on the bedrock shoulder with its false call history waiting like a dare. I told the day what I would do. Repeat measures without flinching, widen the grid, and see if the stone would keep its manners when asked to speak more plainly. The wind had dropped to a hush that pretended kindness. I warmed the gravimeter against my chest until the case felt like a small animal doing its best. At the shoulder station, the rise returned with that same modest conviction. I moved a deliberate half step and the lift softened. I returned and it answered. I took the instrument along the ribbon I had drawn yesterday, pressing stations into the outcrop until the pencil line on the map began to look like a seam rather than a scribble. Each stand was a patient ceremony. Bubble, breathe, wait, right. The ribbon curved toward the snowed alcove, then bent away as if acknowledging a boundary I had not found with my eyes. The magnetometer took its turn. I gave it clear distance from camp metal in my own pockets, then walked the traverse at a pace that lets the field think before you ask it to prove anything. Baseline neat, a soft swell, the notch like a flinch. Over the paler vein in the rock, the notch sharpened once more. I touched the vein with a gloved fingertip, the way you touch the line on a map that tells you the river will force your hand. The stone felt colder there, as if it kept the sun at a distance for reasons unrelated to shade. I said so out loud, just to put a voice in the air that could be told later that it had not been listening to ghosts. Control stations on the blue ice were my plastic saints. Out beyond the nunatak, the gravimeter settled into boring truth, the magnetometer too. I watched my breath smoke in the stillness and knew that boredom is a blessing that pays in trust later. When I returned to the outcrop, the instruments brought their careful wrongness back with them, as if loyal to the rock more than to their makers. I briefed the iridium because duty likes to be fed on time. Weather stable, instruments consistent, core preparation underway, safety normal. The clerk's voice came clean and brisk, then blurred for a heartbeat, then returned. I volunteered nothing about pulses or false lines. Those belong to private notes until they survive a second check. After I signed off, the device flashed a call indicator that meant nothing in any manual I had ever read, and hummed a tone that matched the slow rhythm I had felt through glove and drill frame. I set it face down on the shoulder stone just to see whether anything in me wanted to stop it. I did not stop it. The drill work began clean. Anchors firm. Coolant checked so often it would have laughed if steel could laugh. Bit freshened. I set the carriage over a point where the gravimeter ribbon and the magnetometer notch crossed, not exactly at the crossing but just shy, as if to test whether the rock would reach for the bit rather than the bit for the rock. Feed gentle, posture honest. Chippings lifted in pale scrolls and the motor sang. Then the answering beat came back, slow as before, sure as before, with a latency that didn't match the depth I had earned. I eased pressure until the bit merely kissed and the pulse kept time without me. I shut down and took the magnetometer past the drill frame toward the snowed alcove, wanting a line from sound to field that didn't rely on faith. In the lee edge where drift had settled like spilled flour, the sensor asked for space from metal that was not there. I set it on the snow with the kind of care reserved for items that have learned how to lie without meaning harm. The baseline quivered a fraction. Then the notch returned with a small, almost friendly defiance. I marked the spot with a scrap of cloth held by a pebble and told it to keep its promise while I worked. I wanted more proof than the stone had grace to provide, so I moved to human paper. In the tent, I laid out my rough map and the day's notes on the sleeping pad and traced the ribbon and the notch with a pencil softened by sleeve. When I compared distances my boots knew by muscle with lengths on the page, the world slipped. The tagged route I had paced since arrival measured longer on paper than it felt underfoot in the last traverse. The camp to shoulder leg that usually made my thighs complain had gone by with less burn than the map insisted it should cost. Spatial drift can be nerves, it can be weather. It can also be the kind of quiet panic that comes when ground and representation decide to make you choose who you will trust. I took the iridium outside and placed it on the shoulder stone again, then set my glove next to it. The slow thud pretended to be signal noise, but it met my hand with that same winter steadiness. I lifted the device and the beat dulled, as if distance blurred speech. I set it back and the tone sharpened. I told the rock that I understood we were performing for each other. The rock declined to answer in words. The sample bags felt heavier than their contents would explain. I opened them on the cloth and sifted by touch. A few grains bit at the magnet and came along reluctantly, clinging to the metal with a mood I have known in rocks altered under heat and time. A darker dust stained my fingers faintly metallic. The smell was the same wrong spark I had caught in the wind yesterday, like a generator waking in the next room. I wiped my hands on snow until they felt honest again. Moral pressure took a chair beside the drill carriage and folded its arms. The team lead would be reading my check-ins with the patience of a person responsible for fuel, pilots, and the safety of colleagues who write more poetry in their notebooks than their jobs admit. There would be requests to commit to depth or call the whole and hop to the next candidate. There would be a reminder that remote support is not a talisman. The schedule could not see the pulse. The schedule could not smell the spark. My name would sit on any decision that put my camp beneath a front, while the drill flirted with a story I could not defend on paper. I compromised with my better angels. I set a shallow test with the drill at a position downslope from the crossing, away from the alcove, as a way of proving that the pulse belonged to the ribbon rather than to the day. The motor took load, the bit found rock that behaved like rock, and no answering heartbeat came back. Only the expected chatter, the pleasant hum of steel and stone doing a harmless exchange. I shut down, noted the negative result with a relief I tried not to label as fear, and returned to the crossing like a person who has turned away from a window only to turn back. The sky pressed lower. Snow began to move in sheets thin as breath. The nunatak lost edges until it looked sketched rather than cut. I kept to the tagged path by habit and found that the cloth marker I had set by the alcove had migrated a little in the drift without help from wind. The knot in the cloth was the knot my hands make without thinking. The rock it clung to was not the rock I had chosen. Ice remembers and lies, both can be true. I moved the marker back and felt foolish for the way my heart kept trying to count the beats of weather change against the beats under the stone. When the iridium rang without ringing, I didn't jump. The screen showed a call progress line to nowhere again. I put it next to the drill frame and brought the feed down until the bit kissed the whole shoulder. The thud in the phone and the faint pulse in the frame met like two notes in a slow hymn. I did not lower farther. I did not lift. I stood with a palm on metal and a glove on stone and tried to decide whether the rhythm matched breath, then realized I had been holding mine. I wrote one line in the notebook, plain as duty, core suspended pending weather and review. Beneath it I wrote one more, plain as superstition, stone time audible. Outside, the sky had become pure paper. The pulse kept its winter count. The drill carriage leaned less than a whisper toward the ribbon. The map in my lap refused to forgive a distance I had not walked. Behind me, the iridium made the soft click that usually means a call has ended. The screen did not change. In the same instant, under glove and boot, the nunatak gave a single gentle shudder. Not enough to move a pebble, just enough to let a careful person know that something beneath the stone had shifted by a thought. The storm arrived like a sheet laid over a table, edges straight, purpose clear. Snow moved in breathy veils that made the nunatak look thinner than it was. I let the stove tick and fed it shavings from a block of fuel that always smells like a tired workshop, then stood outside with the gravimeter inside my parka and told myself, as always, that routine is the rope that keeps a person from walking off the world. The ribbon I had mapped between the shoulder stone and the snowed alcove was buried to the ankle, and then some. I reset flags with gloved clumsiness, checked that the anchors on the drill carriage had not learned new minds in the night, and listened to the rock the way a mechanic listens to a patient engine before deciding whether to open the hood. The phone began to ring without ringing. The iridium gave a hush of carrier and rolled into a call screen with no name, no number, only the kind of placeholder a manual writer might use when trying to explain a concept without scaring people. I let it sit on the bedrock shoulder where the gravimeter liked to rise. The speaker carried a slow thud spaced wider than a resting breath, the same winter count I had felt through glove and drill frame. I said my own name into the air like a test. The phone did not notice. The pulse went on, patient, indifferent, like a thing tapping its finger on a table, absent-mindedly. Duty arrived a breath later on the scheduled check. The clerk sounded brisk, not unkind, with that practiced calm of a person who knows how to pry answers from scientists without letting them hang themselves on speculation. I reported weather, I reported safety, I reported that core progress was paused pending stability and review. I said nothing about calls that call themselves, nothing about pulses that seem to borrow a device to test a throat. The clerk handed me a message from the team lead, deepen if safe, otherwise secure samples and prepare to hop. There is a tone some leads learn, a tone that says, I trust you, and another behind it that says, I would prefer not to explain you to anyone in a room with a polished table. The magnetometer wanted to traverse even in snow, so I gave it one. Sensor out, lead smoothed like veins on a quiet wrist. Baseline clean enough to make a tech smile, then the familiar swell and notch near the drifted alcove. I crouched where the pale vein in the rock runs like chalk under the glaze and pressed my glove to stone. The cold felt like a rule. Under it, a slow push returned, a long inhale measured in small persuasion rather than force. I drew a circle on the map with a pencil grown blunt by patient tracing and told that circle we would talk again if the day allowed. The gravimeter behaved like a good citizen when I took it out onto the blue ice beyond the outcrop. Back at the shoulder, it offered its modest lift, steady as a person repeating a promise. I moved half a step and the lift softened. I returned and it resumed. There is peace in an instrument that refuses to be theatrical. I warmed it under my coat and watched the sky wash toward white. I tried the drill with no bit, cheek to frame, glove on stone, the way you press ear to a door when you know enough not to breathe loud. From the frame came the faintest tremor, not mechanical, not eager, only present. It had the feel of a line inspector tapping a pipe to see who is home. Snow whispered against the tent fabric, and the world multiplied the whisper until it sounded like distant speech. I told myself that hearing is a coward in wind, and cowardice is not always wrong. The phone clicked in that small way that says, a call is ending, but the screen held the lie of connection. Then, new text arrived like an annotation on a document you do not remember sharing. A short log that reported an outgoing call from this device to this device. A call length that meant nothing in weather like this because cold plays tricks with seconds. A status of success. I didn't touch the buttons. I didn't clear the line. I wrote the event down with my plain hand and set the pen aside before it could lean toward drama. Fuel argued with time. Sample bags argued with conscience. I opened them in the tent vestibule and sorted by touch. The fine, darker dust that had stained my fingers yesterday clung again, metallic and faint, a smell like a dry spark inside a generator case. A few flecks of the pale cuttings climbed slowly toward the magnet as if the decision to move had taken thought. I labeled each bag with words only, above, middle, below, and a letter that meant more to me than any inspector later, then sealed them and tucked them where warmth would keep the moisture honest. I walked the tagged path from camp to the snowed alcove to be certain I could still do it blind if the sky closed the rest of the way. The sastrugi under crust shifted my stride in small, dishonest ways, making long steps where short ones belonged and stealing short ones where I needed length. At the alcove, the cloth marker I had placed yesterday stood loyal to the wrong rock. I moved it back. The knot in the cloth was the knot my hands know. The rock I remembered wore a new suit of drift that did not explain how the marker had crossed. I told the map to stop being clever and accept that my legs were telling a kind of truth a pencil cannot. Back at the carriage, I leaned the bit against the whole shoulder and touched the switch without feeding. The motor rose to its work and the frame thrummed. The rock answered with that patient beat a moment late, as if the stone were courteous. I did not lower. I did not commit. The team lead's message leaned against my shoulder like a hand that does not push, only rests there long enough to ask whether you like the weight. The iridium found its own voice. The speaker carried, beneath the faint hiss, a low sound like a wooden knock far down a corridor, then a second, then stillness. Then the same knocks again, but gentler, as if the caller had changed rooms. I thought of ice lenses, of meltwater pockets, of brittle fractures that play timpani when stressed, of all the good explanations one can tell oneself when the world is unwilling to be dull. I pressed the phone flat to the shoulder stone and set my glove beside it. The knocks met the glove through the rock as if agreeing to a test. The motor on the drill carriage was off. The wind was lying low. No metal touched metal. The sound came anyway. There are moments in field work when decisions do not take a vote. I thumbed the transmit button and spoke to the empty channel the way a person might speak to a radio net gone quiet in bad weather. I gave my name, my site, my status, then heard my voice come back a shade late and a hair lower. Not the way echo behaves, not the way delay behaves, but the way a person might speak if they were trying not to startle someone sitting very near. I said the same words again and listened. My name returned without the last letter. The site returned with the syllables smoothed as if by a tongue unused to them. The status returned with the verb, changed to a tense I had not used. I lowered the phone to the stone, and the returns came closer to true, as if the rock preferred to help when included. I filed the exchange inside myself as if it were ordinary. I said aloud, for the notebook later, that signal reflection on ice and stone can play cruel stenographer. I said, for the part of me that thinks in rules, that I would not shift the drill from suspend to feed until the sky hinted at grace and I had a friendlier margin for mistakes. I said nothing about how the tent guy lines had in the last hour chosen to hum at a pitch that matched the phone's knocks even when the wind died entirely. Humming lines are petty wonders. They do not belong to reports. The light sagged toward a dull glaze, and the rock took on that color all hard things take when the world decides to be a single tone. I hauled the carriage a whisper toward the crossing, because a whisper was all the rock would let me claim without arguing. The anchors bit and held. I perched the gravimeter in its case inside the vestibule like a sleeping bird and zipped the flap. The phone rested on the shoulder stone, screen dim, connection that would not admit it was ended. I touched the frame with a knuckle, and the slow pulse climbed my hand as if greeting an old appointment. The call that was not a call changed shape. The thuds folded into a pattern that made no sense until my steps matched it without permission. Left, right, pause. Left, pause, right, pause, left. My legs learned a dance I had not taught them. The beat drew my weight toward the whole shoulder, toward the ribbon traced on the map, toward the pale vein that stayed colder than the rest. When I stepped off the pattern, the speaker softened to a hush like a held breath. When I stepped back on, the volume grew the slightest amount. I stood on the pattern until the skin on my face told me I was flushing under the cold. I said, to no one and to the rock both, that we were done for the day. I said it as an order, and I wanted it to sound like an order. The phone clicked as if a far office had pressed a key. The screen went to idle. In the same breath, very gentle, no more than a thought underfoot, the nunatak gave a tidy nudge that ran from the shoulder stone to the snowed alcove, like a shrug shared by two people in a crowd. The drill carriage shifted the width of a fingernail, enough that the bit kissed the edge of the hole and sang a single clear note. I lifted my hand and the note died. The phone did not ring again. The wind held its breath the way a person does when listening at a door. I was still holding the order in my mouth when the iridium brightened and wrote a new line in its log in a script I could not read, as if the rock had finally learned how to sign something. Night on the nunatak is not truly night, only the sky choosing one color and refusing to argue. I let the stove hold a quiet flame and planned the day as if plans could shame the oddities into behaving. The message from the lead sat in my pocket like a coin I didn't want to spend, deep and if safe, otherwise secure samples and prepare to hop. The storm's edge had softened but not left. Snow whispered over rock like paper on paper. The phone lay face down on the shoulder stone where the gravimeter likes to rise, silent now, though its log still carried that string in an alphabet I cannot name. I told myself we would do careful work and then draw a clean line under it. I said the word seal out loud to make it real. I warmed the gravimeter until the case felt like a living palm. At the shoulder station, the lift returned, polite as always. A boot length away it faded, then came back when I returned. The instrument had the calm of a veteran who knows where truth is buried and sees no reason to shout about it. I wrote repeat, marked the stance with a scratch in the crust, and tucked the instrument away. The magnetometer wanted its sweep and received it. Baseline steady until the drifted alcove, then the soft swell in the notch, sharpened over the pale vein that holds the cold like a grudge. I drew a neat loop on the map and did not press the pencil hard. The page already carried enough pressure, samples first, then decisions. I opened the bags inside the vestibule and poured small worlds onto a cloth, a pale hill, and a darker smear. The fine dust kept its dry spark smell, faint but present, the flavor of a generator case opened in winter. A few flecks clung to the magnet with a slowness that felt like thought. I worked them free and slid them into clean sleeves, marked with words only, above, middle, below, and a letter that reminds me where I stood. The thicker sections I wrapped in foil, then tape, then waxed cloth, the old ritual for rock that may be asked to testify under lights far from here. I wrote seal on each with a pencil so blunt it could not pretend to be legal. The phone offered duty at the usual hour. I kept my voice even and let the script do its work. Weather hairline stable, instruments consistent, preparing core for seal and possible move. The clerk read back the key points and added a note from the lead. If core integrity is compromised by weather, cut losses and evacuate. There is a way professionals say kindness from warm rooms. It gilds the hard parts and leaves you to swallow. I didn't mention the strange entries in the log or the call that called itself. I have no appetite for delivering stories that turn into questions I cannot carry. I set the drill carriage over the hole like a lid shading a candle. Anchors checked, coolant purged and replaced, bit pulled and cleaned, barrel inspected, locking collar tested with a gentle insult to catch any loose pride. The frame hummed the way steel hums when it has memory. I chose the short core, One section only, the length a pack can excuse if weather turns, and you are forced to drag your science through air that bites. I spoke aloud the steps like a field catechism. Lower, kiss, cut, lift, cap. The stone answered with its measured patience through the frame, a pulse not mine, steady enough to lean on, slow enough to fear in quiet ways. Lowering without greed felt like walking across a thin creek at dusk. The barrel settled into the shoulder of the earlier cut, and the motor sang a working note. Chippings rose in faint spirals, and the coolant returned clear, then clouded as though a deeper powder had found the circuit. I eased feed until the bit held touch without chew. The answering beat came late, matching nothing I could justify on paper. I shut down for a breath, as method demands, then lifted until the barrel cleared the mouth. In my gloves, it weighed more than it should have by a hair. That hair is where superstition lives. I set the barrel on padded stone as if it might change its mind about being gentle. Seal time is handwork. I slid the plastic liner free with the kind of care that keeps a person from seeing a lifetime of patience crack in an instant. I tamped the top with a plug, not to press, only to suggest stillness. I ran tape in a spiral that leaves no edge for weather to worry. Then a foil wrap, then a second tape, then the waxed cloth that resists everything except teeth. Each layer felt like an argument against the world's habit of smearing truth into rumor. When I pressed the final seal, the stone under my knee gave the faintest nudge, as if acknowledging receipt. I told myself it was a trick of balance and an old bruise. I set the sealed core into its crate and wrote the label with plain letters that will not embarrass me later. The crate sat quiet, a small coffin for a story I could not yet tell. The phone, unsummoned, gave a single tone like a wooden knock at a far end of a hall. I laid my glove on the shoulder stone and found the pulse meeting me there. The same winter pace, neither inviting nor warning, simply present. It bled through the glove into bone in a way that made breath choose its own rhythm in reply. I lifted my hand and it stayed. I pressed both palms and, without meaning to, I matched it. Moral pressure took a seat on the drill carriage and crossed its legs. Hop soon or commit deeper. Protect fuel. Keep the pilots unbothered. Deliver something that can be explained in a room where coffee is warm and eyebrows are instruments. The sealed core felt like an answer that had not learned its own words. I told the carriage we were done and meant it. Then I walked the magnetometer traverse one more time, because superstition and duty sometimes rhyme. Over blue ice, the world stayed dull, a comfort. Back across the nunatak, the swell and notch met me with that small, almost friendly defiance. Spatial drift played its petty trick again. The tagged path from camp to the alcove felt shorter than the map insisted. My legs counted fewer breath breaks than the pencil allowed. The cloth marker clung to the wrong rock even though I had moved it an hour earlier with hands I trust. Ice lies and memory lies. The two together make a chorus. I moved the marker again and told it to behave. The knot in the cloth was still mine. I sat on the crate for a moment too long and felt the faintest vibration move up through the slats, not from the drill, not from the wind, a whisper carried by the sealed cylinder, as if the cut stone had retained a hum. It did not belong to coolant slosh. I had drained the liner neat. It was not metal cooling. The air was even. The hum rose and fell with the rhythm under the shoulder stone. I laid the phone on the crate lid. The device answered with the same slow thuds it had learned from our days here, not through speaker now, but as a tremble in its case, subtle enough to doubt, steady enough to remember. I wrote a line in the notebook for someone else's eyes. Core sealed. Signal artifacts persist. No safety breach. Beneath it, I wrote a line for mine. The sealed core is not quiet. Then I added a scrap I would never include in a report. The crate seems to want a particular compass corner of the tent, and when I place it there, the guy line hum settles into the same measured count the phone keeps. I moved the crate as a test. The hum wandered. I moved it back. The tent pretended not to notice. By late light, the sky returned to that single-page tone. I tied down what could be tied and strapped what could be strapped. The drill frame wore its cover like a calm animal in a stall. I told the lead in a brief message that we would wait for the next window and decide on a hop after rest. The phone sent the report with a quick, eager chirp that sounded almost like thanks. Its log recorded the transmission, and tucked beneath, a second entry for a call I did not place, destination listed as the same string that had puzzled me before. Status success. I put the phone on the sealed crate and watched the screen's idle glow breathe very slightly in time with the rock. Outside, the nunatak lifted a breath you could feel through boots, the tiniest shrug, like a creature testing a limb after sleep. The sealed core hummed in my palm bones so faintly that a less stubborn person would have let it pass. I sat very still until the hum eased. Then I slid the crate farther from the shoulder stone, and the pulse chased it by a fraction. The move cost me nothing and everything at once. I knew then that sealing had not been an end, but a beginning that wanted manners. I zipped the tent and said goodnight to no one. The wind found a new key and held it. The crate settled into its corner as if it had always lived there. In the last light leaking through fabric, the iridium brightened and wrote a new line on its screen in that patient script. Not a number, not a place, only a shape that looked, to an honest eye, like the outline of a core. Morning did not begin so much as thin. The tent walls let in a pale that carried no temperature and no promise. I kept the stove at a low murmur and let my hands learn the world again by touching what I trusted: the gravimeter case, the drill carriage cover, the crate with its sealed core. The hum inside the crate had softened overnight, not gone, more like a sleeper turning once and deciding to wait. I moved the crate a little within the vestibule and felt the guy line's lingering song answer in the same slow count. When I set the crate back in its corner, the line forgave whatever it had been holding. Duty runs on simple acts. I warmed the gravimeter the way one warms something alive and took it out into the stillness. At the shoulder station, it offered its modest lift, obedient to pattern. A step away, and the lift faded, then returned when I came back. The instrument has no appetite for theater. That steadiness can become a whetstone for your fear if you let it. I wrote repeat and marked the stance with a scratch I refreshed each time, proof against Snow's habit of telling new truths. The magnetometer needed room to walk, so I gave it the traverse from the shoulder past the snowed alcove and back along the pale vein. Baseline even, then the swell, then the notch, crisp over the lighter seam like a flinch. The wind was almost nothing, yet the smell of struck stone found me again, that dry spark inside a generator case, faint but familiar. I wrote the smell as fact and did not try to argue it into metaphor. The iridium announced the scheduled check as if nothing in the world were new. I reported weather stable enough to pretend, instruments consistent, core sealed and staged for hop, decision pending. The clerk read back the gist and added that the lead wanted a window for departure as soon as the front allowed. There were questions I did not invite by volunteering mysteries. After I signed off, the device showed a fresh entry in a script that still refused to belong to any manual I knew. Logging an event that I had not begun and assigning it success, I placed the phone on the shoulder stone and listened. The slow thud came through, patient as always. It did not object to being made obvious. I opened the crate to check the seals, even though checking a sealed thing is often a way of undoing your work. The waxed cloth held firm. The tape kept its spiral. The plug sat honest. Through glove and slat, the hum pressed its faint case. I told it that it would go where it was told. The rock under the tent floor answered with a small pressure that did not move anything except the part of the mind that keeps track of what is speaking without words. Spatial drift pulled another petty trick when I walked the tagged path. The cloth marker by the alcove had again chosen a different rock as its friend. The knot in the cloth was mine. The new anchor stone had a shape my hand would not have forgotten. I moved the marker back and tied the knot with the same quick motions my body knows when my thoughts are busy elsewhere. The return to camp cost fewer breaths than the map liked to allow. When I laid the map on a slab and traced distances with a pencil dulled by field use, the lines offered one story and my legs another. I chose the version my legs had earned. There is a way machines tell you they have opinions. I uncovered the drill carriage to wipe frost, and the frame greeted my knuckles with a low tremor that did not belong to wind or to my pulse. The bit hung in its rack like a tool considering whether to be helpful. I spoke my plan aloud. No new depth today. Secure, stage, and hold for hop. The carriage sounded no objection. The ground underfoot let a small breath go and took it back, the kind of miniature shrug shared across stone when something deep decides to shift by an inch, measured in days. I carried the sealed core outside for a test I would not admit to anyone with a polished table. When I set the crate on the shoulder stone, the hum grew a shade clearer under my palms, as if pleased to have its feet on home. When I moved it to blue ice beyond the outcrop, the hum dulled to a near rumor, and the guy line fell out of tune. Back on the stone, The rhythm returned to itself. I wrote the observations plainly and did not claim what they meant. Evidence belongs in notebooks before it belongs in mouths. The magnet took a few flecks from the pale cuttings with a sluggish loyalty. The darker dust stained my glove again with that faint metallic taste. I cleaned the sleeve with snow until the smell gave up. I wanted a friendlier sense to weigh in, so I used the drill frame as a stethoscope once more, cheek to metal, glove on stone. Beneath the weather hush, I heard the slow beat assert itself with a patience that had no interest in persuasion. When I held my breath, it did not quicken. When I breathed, it sometimes chose to match me and sometimes did not, like a companion who declines to be trained. The iridium, face down on the shoulder stone, clicked. The screen woke to a call screen with no name, no figure, only a placeholder that behaved like meaning. I did not lift it. Through the case came a set of knocks spaced wider than an ordinary heart might choose. Left boot, right boot, pause. Left, pause, right. The old rhythm that had learned my steps or taught them. When I set the phone on the crate lid, the knocks drifted softer but stayed in conversation. The sealed cylinder answered with its quiet hum, a thread beneath the beats, like a line drawn with a steady hand under text someone else wrote. Moral pressure sat with me on the snow. Pilots do not enjoy picking up colleagues who have postponed wisdom. Fuel does not care for romance. Schedules are blunt instruments that speak well in rooms where weather is a rumor and rock a map texture. I'm paid to return with something that can be defended. I tried the words aloud for later. The site exhibits coupled field and mechanical anomalies, core sealed. Further work requires team presence. Recommend revisit in a kinder window. The words would do. They always do. The rock answered with nothing that would survive a memo. I secured what a hop would allow. Instruments bored into their cases, sample bags in order, drill frame lashed so it would not test its own weight in a gust. I left the crate for last because hands do what they can to postpone the moment when a decision becomes an action. When I lifted it, the hum moved into my arms and forearms and settled there like a memory of a train through a station someone else loved. The feeling stayed for a while after I set the crate down again, the way good vibrations do when you stop the music. I took one more traverse with the magnetometer because denial wears the mask of rigor. Over blue ice, the baseline sat as neat as a teacher's board. Across the nunatak, the swell and notch kept their manners. Over the pale vein, the notch sharpened. In the lee of the alcove, the sensor asked for space from metal that was not present. I wrote each small obedience and wondered how many correct readings it takes to make a person doubt his own memory of wrongness. Snow began to fall in generous flakes that seemed to have time. The sky lowered until it felt like a lid you could touch. I loaded the crate onto the sled frame I had staged and found the straps too long for the way the corner wanted to sit. When I shortened them, the guy line hum found the slow count again, though the wind lay quiet. I moved the sled a little and the count chased it by a breath. The arithmetic of something underfoot learning mass was not the kind I could write down. When the phone rang without ringing, I did not pretend not to hear. The screen showed another line in that patient script, the kind that learned to look like a signature without belonging to any alphabet I know. I pressed transmit and gave my name, site, and status. My voice returned a shade late and a fraction lower, clipped and smoothed, as if passing through a room with felt walls. I said the same words with a different order. The return aligned closer to truth when the phone rested on the stone. When I lifted it to blue ice, the words went thinner, as if stretched over distance that did not exist. The pulse under glove and boot and frame stayed steady, winter slow, courteous to a fault. It felt less like a demand and more like a boundary being drawn with care. Seal the core, it seemed to say, and place it where it belongs. The thought is mine, not the rock's. Attribution matters, even when you are alone. I tied off the sled and gave the camp a shorter perimeter, flags reset where drift had chosen to edit. The cloth marker near the alcove leaned toward a new friend, and I let it, deciding that sometimes maps are better students than teachers. In last light, the nunatak's edges softened to the simple shape all hard things take when asked to be patient. I slid the crate into the vestibule again, and the hum relaxed into that same near-sleep state, present but polite. I wrote a message for the lead with the confidence my voice can manufacture when it must. Core sealed and staged, conditions marginal, recommending hop at first safe window, anomalies logged for follow-up. The send tone from the phone struck the air like a small wooden tap and then settled. The log recorded the transmission and tucked beneath it another success for a call I did not place. I lay a palm on the shoulder stone one more time before zipping the tent. The pulse met me there, unhurried even, unchanged by my plans. It asked for nothing. It permitted much. The sealed core hummed as if relieved to be named. Somewhere under the nunatak, a door I would never see had shifted on its hinge by the width of patience. I woke before the light made choices and lay still with my hand on the crate, letting the hum find me first so I would not pretend I had imagined it. The stove whispered when I asked it to. Canvas lines rested without song. The iridium slept face down on the shoulder stone, as if it had learned the habit from me. I told the day its work. Secure what could be moved, send a clear recommendation, hold for the window, leave with a clean conscience, or stay with a reason that could survive other people's eyebrows. Outside, the sky was a single quiet color. The nunatak wore that patience rock keeps when weather tries to talk it into forgetting. I warmed the gravimeter under my coat until it remembered kindness and set it at the shoulder station. The rise arrived like a familiar nod. A step away, and it softened. Back again, and it returned. I wrote repeat and refreshed the scratch in the crust because the crust likes to forget. I walked the magnetometer traverse for the comfort of obedience. Baseline neat across blue ice, the soft swell, and the notch back near the drifted alcove, the notch sharpening over the pale vein that holds cold as if it were a craft. I drew the loop again, lighter this time, to keep the map from thinking it had won. Duty rang. The clerk's voice came steady, one eye on weather, one on schedules. I reported conditions marginal but workable. Core sealed and staged, hop recommended when the ceiling lifts. The clerk read back the words that make pilots nod. A pause, then a note from the lead. Hold position, be ready to move fast when signaled, conserve fuel, no heroics. There is a kindness in being told not to be brave. It frees a person to listen. When I ended the call, the iridium kept a connection it would not admit. The screen idled, and yet a new logline wrote itself in that patient script I still could not name, an event tagged as complete. I set the device on the shoulder stone and heard the slow thud answer, winter paste, courteous. I placed it on blue ice, and the sound went thin, stretched like a thread over an empty room. Back on stone, and it tucked itself in near the pitch that had taught my steps a dance I have not confessed to anyone with a badge. I checked the crate seals in the vestibule, though seals do not like to be checked. Tape tight, cloth true, plug honest, label plain. Through glove and slat, the hum worked at my bones like a remembered train. I lifted the crate to the sled frame, and the guy line's old song started up again. The same measured count I could find in my wrist if I let it. The same measured count I had felt through drill frame and rock and phone. I snugged the straps and the song grew a hair clearer, as if approving. Spatial drift played its game while I walked the tagged path to the alcove and back. The cloth marker had made a new friend of a rock it had not known yesterday. My knot was still my knot. I moved the marker back, feeling like a person tidying a room that rearranges itself when you look away. The return to camp cost fewer breaths than the map permits. The pencil gave me a distance that my legs refused to sign. I chose my legs. I opened the sample roll for the last time. The darker dust still clung to glove fabric with reluctant affection, hanging onto the magnet as though deciding whether to forgive it. The smell of dry spark came and went, the faint note of a generator case in winter. I wrapped the sleeves again and told them to be quiet. They pretended to try. The drill carriage stood under its cover like an animal that remembers instructions. I laid my cheek to the frame out of habit more than need, and felt the barest tremor move through it toward the ground, the way heat moves across a hand held near a lamp, no machine alive, no motor running. No, only that patient pulse replying from below, a civil tap that made no promises, demanded nothing, and cherished its rhythm as if it belonged to something older than method. I sent the hop recommendation in language that would survive the tidy rooms. Site exhibits coupled anomalies of field and mechanical character, core sealed, safe extraction preferred at first window, revisit recommended with a team and a longer rope. The send tone tapped the air like wood against wood. The log took the message and, beneath it, signed another success for a call I had not thought to make. I told the crate it would travel. The sled took the weight like a volunteer. I dragged it a short arc across the rock to test angles, and the guy line's count followed as if a conductor had lifted a baton. When I moved onto the blue ice apron, the count thinned to a whisper, and the hum in the crate backed off as though distance were a rule it could not ignore. Back on the stone, and everything returned to itself. I wrote this down with the ordinary pen and tried not to lean the letters toward belief. Wind found a key and tried it. The tent answered with a brief soft rattle. A flake landed on my lip and tasted clean. I ran one more traverse for courage disguised as rigor. Over the pale vein, the notch sharpened again. In the lee of the alcove, the sensor asked softly for distance from metal that did not exist. Out beyond the nunatak, my boots jarred against invisible seams in the ice where none should be, as if the sheet had learned new joints in the night. I said the word afterwards to no one in particular and kept walking until the world agreed to be dull. I came back to camp and found the iridium already bright. The screen showed a live call with no origin and no destination. The placeholder blocks scrolling as if patient hands were turning a book. I did not touch it. Through the speaker, a knock sounded far away, then closer, then close enough that Glove and Stone picked it up in the same breath. I put the phone on the crate. The hum and the knock settled into a pattern that did not feel like language and did not feel like accident. Left wait, right wait, pause, right, pause, left. My feet wanted a reply. I held them still. There is moral pressure that arrives with orders, and there is the other kind that grows from a sense that leaving might be a kind of theft. I am not paid for the second kind. I said aloud that we would move when told and not before. The rock beneath my boots loosed a small breath, no more than you feel when a sleeping animal turns its head away from light. The sled edged a finger's width downhill, with no hand on it. I set a boot against the runner and the motion stopped, but not because of me. The sense was of a thing yielding to spare my dignity. I went to the shoulder stone and put my palm flat. The pulse met me there, winter slow, gentle as a test. I counted without counting, then gave up and let it write its own measure into me. I said my name into the air, then said it again with the sight and the word ready. The iridium echoed back the shape of those words, a breath late and a shade lower, clearing its throat on the last syllable the way the rock had taught it. I rested the device on the stone, and the echo tightened as if the ground itself were correcting my pronunciation. The weather lifted its lid an inch. Across the flats, the visibility opened enough that a pilot might call it workable after a think. The clerk's voice came, quick now. Window possible, stand by for confirmation. Can you stage at the mark nearest the ice edge? I said yes because that was the correct word. I said yes even though yes felt like moving a box out of a quiet room where it had finally learned how to speak. I hauled the sled toward the marked edge in a line as straight as the sight would allow. The guy line kept its count. The crate hummed, not protest, not approval, only presence. The magnetometer, slung at my side and switched off, clicked its casing against my hip with an odd sympathy that matched the count for a few steps, and then decided it had better things to do. At the ice edge, I set the sled and took the strain out of the strap with a neat loop the way I was taught. The stone underfoot gave one tidy nudge that ran along the outcrop like a rumor-making friends. The iridium flashed a confirmation and a timing that meant little in air like this, but enough for a rotor to find. I said Roger in a tone that belongs to tidy rooms and people who like to hear that word. The screen dimmed. Under the dimness, the patient script drew a new line, a curve that looked, if you stared longer than is healthy, like the outline of our route from the shoulder stone to the edge, a line smoother than my steps deserved. I stood with a palm on the crate and the other on the shoulder stone, my boots braced in a stance that knows weather has preferences. The pulse rose into both hands at once and matched itself, a rhythm finding echo in its own twin. The sled shifted a breath toward the edge as if the line between rock and ice had become a gentle slope. I set my weight and it paused. Not because I stopped it, but because it wanted me to feel that it could have gone. Somewhere high and not far, air thickened the way it does under blades. The sky did not change color. It changed intention. The pulse under the stone and the hum inside the crate held their patience, steady as a clock that prefers one room over another. The phone, unasked, found a voice and carried a soft knock that fell exactly between the beats, as if a third thing had joined hands with the other two, and all were waiting for a cue that would not be mine to give. I told the nunatak we were leaving and that I would return with more ears and better manners. The rock did not answer with anything I could put in a log. It answered with a small measured pressure up through boot and bone, and the word that came to mind was permission, though I would never write that word where a lead might have to defend it. The sled eased a whisper nearer the rim. The pulse, the hum, and the knock aligned in a cadence that felt like a door 3 rooms away, swinging toward open and then thinking better of it. The rotor thump reached at last. Heavy air pressed into a rhythm that had nothing to do with stone. For a single breath, the 2 patterns met and made a weave across my body. I will not be able to describe to anyone I owe plain speech. The iridium brightened, as if pleased to be understood at last. Its screen filled with the patient script, the same characters that had been practicing at the edge of my days here. And they resolved not into words, not into any alphabet, but into a shape I could trace with a gloved finger. A circle with a seam through it, top to bottom, like a core with its story not yet split. The sled leaned toward the edge by the width of a thought. I held one hand to stone, one to crate, the thudding air above coming closer, the measured patience below holding. The knock between them asking a question I had no business answering and every reason to hear.